All right. Welcome back, everybody, to the brain injury discussion. This is your host, Jay. Today, we're going to talk about not really brain injury survivors, but let's talk about the caregivers, the people that do the day in and day out support for survivors of brain injury. Let's talk about the people that enable people to live either out in the community or take care of their family members who have survived a brain injury. And so this should be a topic we should care about as well as the survivor. And in the role of a case manager, this is something we should be aware of. This is something that maybe we should care about as well. Like always, sources will be in the description below. I'd appreciate if you read those. Also, we'd appreciate your feedback in the form of a like. Maybe you want to leave a comment down below. Maybe you're a caregiver, or maybe you know of a caregiver. And so leave a comment down below if you've ever encountered that situation. But also, more importantly, please subscribe to the channel. We put out this information weekly. We try to keep it educational and informative, but also practical as well. So, with that being said, we have a decent amount of information to get into. So, let's get started. So, first, who are caregivers? Caregivers can range, but who are they? Well, first, they can be a family member. And a lot of times it might be a spouse, a child, or parent, as we see here in this situation. It looks like it is the parent, the children that are caregiving for this gentleman who probably had a brain injury as well as a spinal cord injury or maybe a stroke. And so they are caregivers. They rely on these people to provide that daily support. And so caregivers can be a family member, but it does not always have to be a family member. Maybe the family is, way across the nation. Maybe they're in a different state, or maybe they're far away. And sometimes they need expert medical staff or trained medical staff, specifically CNA or certified nursing assistant or aides, nursing aides, people that can do the activities of daily living, help prepare and, provide food, kind of the essentials, maybe getting out of bed. Maybe if someone has hemiparesis from a stroke, maybe they need an aid to get out of bed and into a wheelchair or vice versa, or maybe moving around their own home. Maybe they need that assistance. And so that is where medical staff can really come into play, as well as preventing further brain injury, addressing and cleaning wounds, all of that. There are medical staff who have to be caregivers as well. Sometimes the medical staff can be the family member as well. Maybe you have a family member that's a nurse or an aide or a someone who is medical in the family who understands those kinds of things, and maybe they are the caregiver. Caregivers can be either part or full time. Again, in this situation that we see in the graphic here to the right of the screen, this would probably require a full time caregiver, someone there on site every day, able to address issues or things that come up 24 hours a day. And so it really takes a lot to be a caregiver. But the main point here is they are someone who cares for the brain injury survivor. Again, we're talking about that brain injury survivor. This is one of those important supports that can really help not only improve the quality of life, but length of life and also the quantity of life as well. And some brain injury survivors will need a caregiver. But with that being said, let's continue on and let's talk about the role of a caregiver. We've identified who it can be. Again, those are some possibilities. Those are some of the normal possibilities. But what do caregivers actually do? Well, they maintain the residence and the cleanliness. Someone who has had a stroke probably is not able to do housework or cleaning. And so you want to have a good place to live. Caregiver will definitely be important in that role to make sure that there's a safe environment, especially when it comes to AIDS, medical management, and prevention. Again, you turn someone on their side, check for bed sores. That is an important job to prevent sepsis as well as other kinds of injuries and keep people out of hospitals, ideally, and in their own home. So it could be something as far as a prevention measure as taking something off the floor that would create a trip hazard. Or it could be something as complex as making sure that medications are taken, as well as identifying bed sores or back sores or wounds. And so, again, prevention is always a big part of this. Caregivers also deal with mobility and activities of daily living. Case managers like myself, we call them ADLs. And so activities of daily living covers a wide range of things. And so thinking about that, you tend to think, okay, this is very involved. Being a caregiver, you're there for every aspect of their life at that point. And again, this would be a full-time caregiver. It's not every ADL in every situation, but maybe there is a part of that ADL list that maybe they can't do. Maybe they can't manage their own schedule, or maybe they have trouble like getting to appointments or managing their medications. Again, a caregiver really helps when it comes to those kind of areas. Caregivers also coordinate medical care and medical needs. So they are, if they have a brain injury case manager, they're probably working hand in hand to get the medical care and take care of those needs for the brain injury survivor. But also, the caregiver is usually the one who is communicating with the professionals and the family. So, especially in the case of a nursing aide, they are usually the first line of defense, but also the first line of communication as well. Simply saying, "Hey, tell my brain injury survivor family member that I care about them. I'm thinking of them. I want to come by Saturday or something like that." Those are the kind of roles that a caregiver has to, really can do, and it addresses those activities of daily living. But with that being said, let's continue on and let's talk about how caregivers are specific, what kind of roles are specific to brain injury when it comes to caregivers. Um, Again, we talked about in the previous slide management of medical needs, but for brain injury, we're also going to add rehabilitation on that. So think about your physical or occupational therapy. Uh, those kinds of needs arise as well, especially with stroke or brain injury survivors. Then you have coordinating and providing that transportation. Again, that transportation might be a big issue in some areas, especially rural areas out in my service area. And so that's something that maybe we should be aware of as well. Also, we should assist with cognitive and physical tasks. Again, those roles, for example, maintaining a calendar, maintaining an agenda, getting to an appointment on time. That takes a lot of cognitive energy and it takes a lot of physical energy. And so, when it comes to the world of brain injury, having a caregiver there on site is a really beneficial thing to some brain injury survivors. And also, we'll also see the adapting of the new normal post brain injury. Brain injury affects everybody differently. Sometimes it's severe, and we see this in cases of stroke. Sometimes it's a blow to the head, or maybe it's a car accident or a concussion. And so what we see is that, yes, there might be a change in the person. So a caregiver can help adapt to that new situation, that new normal of how that person's or that survivor's brain works and operates. A big role for caregivers is, again, preventing further brain injury. I say this to say that, yes, safety is a very big thing, and that's something that caregivers need to be aware of and need to be able to take active measures. And so, looking for those hazards and looking for those areas of, well, let me take this trip hazard out. Let me make sure we're leaving early to this medical appointment that's far away. Preventing that further brain injury is going to be useful and helpful, even though you might not necessarily see the after effects right away. And so those are things that specific to brain injury, a caregiver can really help out in those ways. But when we talk about caregivers, we need to talk about burnout as well. Again, we see this with medical staff. We see this in a lot of professions. We even see that in the military, where you see people burn out because they've been doing it so long. Usually, when it comes to caregivers, it's an extra job on top of personal work. Some people have to go to work and then come back and do caregiving. And that can be a lot of stress for a caregiver. And so when we talk to caregivers, we need to keep that in mind that, especially if it's a family member who has to go to their normal job and then come back and be a caregiver, that's a lot of stress on that person. That's a lot of responsibility. A lot of times we see that information can be lacking and unclear. Again, someone who maybe isn't a medical professional now has to caregive for their spouse or their parent or their child who has a brain injury. That can be a lot on the caregiver's, mental, emotional, and physical health as well. And information is great, but sometimes that information just, it's unclear. Maybe it's too vague. And so case managers like myself can help step in and help provide resources. Obviously, being a caregiver, it impacts the caregiver him or herself on their relationship and their finances. Maybe they can't go and work that full-time job. Maybe they have to take a job much closer to home. Or maybe they need a full-time caregiver that is a medical aid. Maybe they're not close enough to be that full-time or part-time caregiver. And so we see that that does have an impact on the lives of the caregivers for brain injury. It also affects their quality of life and their free time and their hobbies, especially if their free time, which again, maybe they have to stay with their family member who's a brain injury survivor instead of going on a camping trip over the weekend. Maybe they can't go to this festival or carnival because a brain injury survivor might need them for something else. And so that affects the caregiver's quality of life as well. Caregiving can be a very thankless job with high levels of stress, kind of along the lines of a lot of medical fields as well, is that it can be a very thankless job. It doesn't get enough credit. I'll say that personally. Caregiving is a very high stress, can be rewarding, but it's also a thankless job at some times, especially for those who have high needs for ADL support. And then there's this need for respite care and supports. Again, supports is something that I can help someone connect with. I can help a caregiver connect with maybe a support group. But respite care is something that maybe we should look into a little bit more. Maybe that's something that when we meet someone who is a brain injury survivor, when we talk to their caregiver, maybe they're getting burned out. And so respite care will come in and give them a break. Give them a break, so that way, one, they can get the rest, they can recuperate, albeit very temporarily, maybe a few days, a week, maybe a few weeks. That would give enough time for maybe the caregiver to take a rest and to reset, take care of some personal business as well. And so these are things that, again, case managers should not only know about, but be aware of and take into consideration. What does this lead me as a brain injury case manager to conclude? Well, first, we should care not only about the brain injury, we should care about the caregivers too. Again, uh, even though I'm not the case manager of the caregiver, that's something that ties into the brain injury survivor, and we should be aware of that and be able to help provide resources, maybe connect them with that respite care that will allow them to take a break, maybe allow them to get a full night's sleep. Again, that could be very helpful for a caregiver. Caregiving, again, can be extremely taxing and hard, especially when it is a family member, um, especially a family member who maybe had a stroke and relies on intensive help to do daily tasks, which prior to that stroke would have been either, normal or, maybe not, self-reliant person who uh, maybe now needs a caregiver. And so that can be very stressful, especially on a family member who has to be there for someone and see the changes happen. And so, again, this is a hard thing. So I have a lot of respect for caregivers in that light. Caregivers, they deserve our support and respect. They're doing a very hard job. They're keeping the brain injury survivor safe, alive, healthy, and well, especially when it comes to brain injury. We need to be able to consider respite care, and we need to care for the caregiver too. Why do I say that? Um, it's not just we talk about brain injury and brain injury survivors and disease processes and so on, but we should also be able to talk about the people that help the brain injury survivor. And maybe this is something that case managers should be aware of and, maybe at least be in connection with a respite care or someone who provides respite care. And so not just about the brain injury survivor, but also about the people who support them, the family member, the caregiver as well. But with that being said, here are my references. I would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel. We keep this information educational, but also practical. We'd appreciate if you give this video a like, maybe subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below. Maybe you know a caregiver, maybe you have had to caregive for someone else. Maybe you can insight us onto some of the stresses that come with being a caregiver. We'd love to hear it in the comments. But with that being said, I hope everyone has a wonderful day and don't forget, protect your brains.